Welcome back to Stoic Capsule, friends. Today we're diving into something most people avoid talking about, but it's the very thing that quietly drains your energy, your confidence, and even your peace of mind. What are the behaviors you should never, under any circumstance, tolerate from anyone? Not from your boss, not from your partner, and yes, not even from your family. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Too many people treat your time, your energy, your emotional well-being as if it's theirs to use whenever they want. They act like you're an endless emotional vending machine ready to dispense comfort, attention, or money at the push of a button. Boundaries, to them, those are optional suggestions. But here's the danger. By the time you realize the toll it's taken, you're already running on empty, wondering why every interaction leaves you feeling hollow. I once worked with a client, we'll call her June. She was in her mid-60s, endlessly kind. The type of woman who baked cookies for neighbors and never said no when family asked for help. But it wasn't until her daughter asked for money for the fourth time that month, with zero intention of paying it back, that June finally saw the truth. This wasn't love. This was entitlement, hidden under the excuse of family loyalty. That's why in this video, I'm revealing 5 behaviors you must never tolerate from anyone. If you allow them to continue, the cost is always yours to pay. But once you learn to spot them and defend your peace, you'll never see relationships the same way again. So if you're ready to stop justifying disrespect and start protecting your inner calm, make sure you like, drop a comment below, and subscribe, because what we're about to build together is nothing less than emotional armor. Let's begin with the first behavior: constant criticism. It doesn't start with an explosion. It creeps in quietly. Maybe it begins with one casual remark about your clothes. Then it shifts to your voice, your choices, your dreams. Slowly, you find yourself shrinking, not because you've changed, but because someone else has been convincing you that nothing about you is ever good enough. This isn't constructive feedback. Constructive feedback is clear, specific, and rooted. Unkind helps you grow. Constant criticism, on the other hand, is psychological warfare. It doesn't target what you do. It targets who you are. And here's the dangerous part. Many people, especially those who've endured it for decades under the disguise of family dynamics or tough love, end up normalizing it. But let me remind you, what feels familiar is not always what's healthy. Just because someone has always spoken to you that way doesn't mean they ever had the right to. Science even backs this up. Ongoing criticism, especially from people we're emotionally attached to, activates the brain's threat system. Over time, your mind learns to anticipate rejection even when none exists. You hesitate before speaking, second-guess your own ideas, and lose the natural confidence you were born with, not because you lack ability, but because someone else has been chiseling away at it. In families, this behavior often hides behind comparisons. Why can't you be more like your brother? In workplaces, it's the supervisor who never sees what you do right, only what you do wrong. And in both cases, the impact is the same. You begin to doubt yourself before the world ever has a chance to. That is why constant criticism is the first behavior you must never, ever tolerate. They notice every flaw, yet never acknowledge your achievements in relationships. It's the partner who slips in backhanded remarks under the disguise of just being honest. At work, it's the supervisor who points out every mistake, but never once says, "Well done." These aren't harmless quirks of personality. They're emotional strategies, whether intentional or unconscious, that slowly make you feel smaller than you really are. And the longer you allow it, the deeper the damage becomes. From a Stoic perspective, this kind of persistent criticism is the opposite of what a virtuous life demands. The Stoics valued discipline and resilience, yes, but not silence in the face of disrespect or abuse. Epictetus reminded us that while we cannot control the actions of others, we remain fully responsible for what we tolerate and how we choose to respond. To live with dignity requires drawing a line between what is acceptable and what is not. A person who constantly tries to diminish you is not offering wisdom. They are corroding your spirit. So how do you respond when you realize this behavior is present in your life? The very first step is to validate your own experience. That sinking feeling you get around them, that heaviness in your chest, is not weakness. It's your internal compass sounding an alarm. The tension in your shoulders, the fatigue that lingers after every conversation, the hesitation before answering their call, these are not small inconveniences. They are the signs of repeated emotional violation. Responding doesn't always mean launching into confrontation. For some, especially those bound by family dynamics that stretch over years, it might begin with subtle redirection, calm communication, or creating gentle distance. For others, it may require firm boundaries, reducing the time you allow this person in your life, or even ending the relationship entirely. What's most dangerous is pretending it isn't happening, absorbing the damage, simply because naming the truth feels harder. Here's the reality. You were not born believing you weren't enough. That belief was taught to you, often disguised as care. And like any false lesson, it can and must be unlearned. No one gets to convince you that your worth is conditional. No one has the right to make you second-guess your value through constant criticism masquerading as love or honesty. The very moment you recognize this pattern, you begin to reclaim your ground. Step by step, as you pull away from the noise, you start to hear your own voice again, clear, steady, and unapologetic. That is where healing begins. And that is precisely where their control ends. Which brings us to the second behavior you must never tolerate: boundary violations. I remember an elderly client who once confided in me about her son. She had trusted him with a spare key to her home, imagining it would only be used in case of emergencies. At first, he dropped by to leave groceries or paperwork, but soon he began showing up while she was asleep, or worse, sitting silently in her living room, waiting for her to finish her bath. When she confronted him, explaining how unsettling and invasive this felt, he laughed it off. He told her she was overreacting, insisting he was just trying to help. Yet the very next week, he did it again. That's when she asked me a heartbreaking question. Why do I feel guilty for wanting privacy in my own home? That's exactly what boundary violation looks like. And it is behavior number 2 that must never be excused. When someone repeatedly ignores the limits you clearly set, and then manipulates you into feeling like you're the problem, this isn't a misunderstanding. It's a power play. And it cuts deep. It's not just the act of crossing a boundary that hurts, it's the message underneath. Your comfort, your needs, your autonomy don't matter. That's the unspoken implication every time a boundary is ignored. But let's get something clear. Boundaries are not rigid walls designed to shut people out. They are guidelines like invisible fences we create to protect what's most precious in our lives: our time, our energy, our emotional bandwidth. For some, it might mean wanting advanced notice before guests arrive. For others, it's choosing not to discuss politics or religion at the dinner table. In relationships, it could mean needing time alone, financial transparency, or even digital privacy. None of these are unreasonable. Yet boundary violators, especially those closest to us, have a way of making us feel like they are. Why does this happen? Some people simply were never taught to respect boundaries. They grew up in homes where emotional access was demanded, not earned, where closeness meant control, not genuine care. And so, they continue the cycle, believing that if they love you, they should have unrestricted access to you, your time, your thoughts, even your physical space. But then there's a far more dangerous type of boundary violator, the manipulative kind. These people know exactly what they're doing. They don't barge through the door. Instead, they test it. A little push here, a subtle nudge there, carefully watching how far they can go before you push back. And when you finally do speak up, what happens? They laugh it off, call you dramatic, selfish, or even cold. They turn your own empathy against you, weaponizing your kindness to shame you for daring to have standards. The subtle violations are often the most sinister, precisely because they creep in so quietly. The co-worker who makes too many jokes about your personal life. The parent who deliberately brings up sensitive topics in public. The friend who borrows money but always avoids repayment. The partner who accidentally stumbles across your private messages. Each instance on its own might seem small, almost dismissible, but piece by piece, they chip away at your self-respect until one day you no longer believe you're entitled to boundaries at all. From a Stoic perspective, boundaries aren't just preferences, they're an essential act of self-governance. Epictetus taught that no one has power over your inner world unless you hand it to them. But remember, the outer world, your time, your space, your energy also requires stewardship. And when you allow others to repeatedly intrude, you don't just give away your energy. You begin to forget what is yours to protect in the first place. The key here isn't aggression, it's clarity. When someone crosses a line, respond with precision, not with anger, not with endless explanations, but with direct clarity. Describe the behavior, state how it affects you, define what needs to change. No apologies, no guilt. You're not punishing them, you're preserving yourself. But here's a truth most people miss. Boundaries without consequences are not boundaries at all. They're just suggestions. If someone continues to violate your limits even after you've made them clear, it's not time for another conversation, it's time for action. That action might mean reducing the time you spend with them, ending certain conversations, Or, in some cases, cutting ties completely. The longer you tolerate repeated violations, the louder the message you send that your lines are flexible, maybe even invisible. But here's the reality: no one who truly loves you will resent your boundaries. At first, they may stumble, yes, but genuine people will adjust. They will ask questions. They will respect the new rules. Because real love has never been about unlimited access, it has always been about respect. So ask yourself this: who in your life resists your boundaries? And what does that resistance reveal about how much or how little they truly value your autonomy? How many times have you felt deeply uncomfortable yet said nothing? How many moments have you swallowed your truth, convincing yourself that keeping the peace was easier than speaking up? Maybe at one time, silence felt necessary. But here and now it's no longer acceptable. Your space is sacred. Your peace is not optional, and your boundaries are not negotiable. That must be the line no one crosses again. 3. Manipulation and gaslighting. Did you know that long-term victims of gaslighting often lose their ability to tell the difference between intuition and anxiety? That's the kind of quiet, corrosive damage emotional manipulation causes. It doesn't leave bruises you can point to. It leaves confusion. It doesn't scream in your face. It whispers slowly, steadily until your inner voice grows silent. This is behavior number 3 that no one, absolutely no one, should ever get away with. Unlike other forms of abuse, manipulation and gaslighting don't come with clear labels. They don't crash through the door. They seep in like smoke. They disguise themselves as kindness, as concern, even as love. And that disguise, that mask, is what makes them so dangerous. Where constant criticism might chip away at your confidence, manipulation does something even darker. It erodes your clarity. Suddenly, you're not only unsure how you feel, you're unsure if you're even allowed to feel at all. At first, it's subtle. A phrase here, a contradiction there. You're too sensitive. I never said that. You always twist things. Do you hear the pattern? These aren't simple disagreements. They're deliberate erasures. Each phrase is carefully chosen to make you doubt your own reality, and over time, you begin surrendering pieces of your certainty, handing it over just to keep the peace. Eventually, you stop trusting your memory, your decisions, even your instincts. That is not conflict. That is psychological displacement. Now pause, be honest with yourself. How do you feel after being around someone like this? Do you leave conversations with a nagging sense that you've missed something important? Do you replay arguments over and over in your head just to reassure yourself that you weren't imagining things? That's not overthinking, that's your subconscious desperately trying to stitch itself back together after being torn apart. The Stoics warned us about this. They taught that truth is the highest pursuit. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that perception is not always reality, and that wisdom lies in seeing things as they truly are, not as others present them to be. But gaslighting turns this teaching upside down. It warps reality so carefully, so masterfully, that you begin to doubt your own eyes and ears, relying instead on the abuser's version of events because yours suddenly feels unstable. This is Especially cruel for older adults, people who have built entire lives on being rational, composed, resilient. Imagine the pain of suddenly having a younger or more volatile person challenge everything you thought you knew about yourself, not with fists, but with fragments, not with blows, but with doubt. That's the weapon, and when used often enough, it convinces you that you're fragile. But you're not fragile. You're being manipulated. So how do you defend yourself? The first step is to stop trying to win the argument. A gaslighter doesn't seek resolution. They seek control. And the more energy you spend explaining your side, the more raw material they have to twist against you. Instead, shift into observation. Begin writing things down. Keep a journal of conversations. Record the contradictions. Collect what I call emotional evidence, not to throw back in their face, but to rebuild your connection to your own reality. Then, test your perceptions. Share them with someone outside the fog, someone who has no reason to deceive you. When they validate your experience, you start reclaiming the ground you thought you had lost. When you begin to share your experiences with people outside the fog, friends, mentors, or those you trust, you'll see it. They will validate your reality. And when they do, something powerful happens. You begin to realize just how far you've been pulled away from your truth. The next step is crucial. Set a consequence, not a threat, not an ultimatum. A consequence. Think of it as a boundary with a door, not a wall. Because when the pattern repeats, and make no mistake, you don't need another exhausting fight. What you need is freedom. The scariest part of gaslighting is its stealth. You don't realize it's happening until you've already started silencing yourself. Until you've already started doubting the voice that once guided you with certainty. But remember this, there is always a line, and the moment you cross back over it into self-trust, the fog begins to lift, slowly, but surely. You start remembering who you were before every conversation became a negotiation with reality. Understand this clearly. Emotional manipulation is not a misunderstanding. It's not a communication problem. It is an engineered system of control. And no one, absolutely no one who truly loves you would ever want to confuse you, diminish you, or dismantle the core of who you are. So what do? Trust the discomfort. Trace it back to the pattern. And when someone repeatedly makes you feel like you've lost your mind, it's time to stop giving them access to it. That is not weakness. That is wisdom. And that wisdom is yours to reclaim. 4. Dishonesty that destroys trust. There's a particular silence that falls the moment you realize someone has lied to you. Not a small omission. Not a misunderstanding, a real lie, intentional, premeditated, delivered with a straight face. In that instant, something breaks. Not only the bond between you and them, but something inside you. Because just 5 minutes ago, the world felt solid, and now it doesn't. Chronic dishonesty is the 4th behavior that no one should ever get away with. Not in your relationships, not in your home, and certainly not in your heart. Some lies arrive dressed in charm. Others are wrapped in justification. But the outcome is always the same. Your emotional foundation begins to erode. And here's the painful truth. It's not the outrageous, dramatic lies that leave the deepest scars. It's the steady drip of small ones over time, the white lies, the half-truths, the promises made but never kept, the convenient forgetfulness, the shifting stories that almost match, but not quite just enough to make you wonder if pressing further is even worth it. This kind of dishonesty isn't just inconvenient, it's destabilizing, psychologically destabilizing. Because repeated exposure to lies doesn't just damage your trust in others, it damages your trust in yourself. You start to doubt your intuition. You second-guess your memory. You feel foolish for expecting consistency. That internal erosion, that quiet collapse of self-trust, is the real cost of living with someone who cannot, or will not, tell the truth. And dishonesty wears many masks. There's omission, what they conveniently don't say but know they should. There's minimization, making harmful behavior seem small, trivial, insignificant. There's deflection, changing the subject the moment accountability approaches. And, perhaps most insidious of all, there's betrayal dressed as kindness, saying all the right words while doing all the wrong things, behind closed doors. What's even more disturbing is how normalized these patterns have become. We live in a culture that often reframes deception as strategy, protecting someone's feelings, avoiding drama, managing expectations. But peel back the language, and you'll see it clearly. These are simply softer names for manipulation over time. Habitual liars become masters at this reframing. They convince others it's no big deal. They tell you everyone lies. They accuse you of being too rigid, too unforgiving. They insist that if you really loved them, you'd stop making everything into a problem. But here lies a hard truth you must accept. People who lie consistently are telling you something far louder than their words ever could. They're showing you without hesitation that your peace is secondary to their convenience, that your trust is a currency they're willing to gamble, that their comfort is worth more than your clarity. The Stoics were unflinching about truth. For them, honesty was never just a virtue. It was a discipline. Because a person who cannot be truthful is not simply untrustworthy, they are incapable of growth. And a relationship without trust, that's not intimacy. That's performance. Seneca once taught that truth is the first lesson of friendship. And it still holds today. Without truth, there is no genuine connection, only the hollow illusion of one dot. So what do you do when dishonesty becomes a pattern? You stop listening to the apologies, and you start watching the behavior. Does it change? Or does it repeat? Do you see moments of real accountability, or only temporary guilt, followed by the same cycle again and again? When words and actions don't align, believe the actions every time, and most importantly, you stop trying to fix them. Their dishonesty is not your project. It is not your burden to carry. The moment you take responsibility for someone else's inability to tell the truth, you place yourself inside a prison of emotional labor, a prison they will never help you escape. So you shift. You start protecting your clarity. You limit your exposure. You set clear expectations. And if the lies continue, you enforce real consequences. That might look like distance. It might look like separation. It might look like silence. But it must look like something, because the only thing worse than being lied to is staying in a place where the truth never shows up, You deserve consistency, not perfection. But honesty, not empty reassurances, but real accountability. And when that isn't present, it's not your job to accept it. It's your job to leave. Because honesty isn't just about morality. It's about mental health. And without it, you don't just lose trust in them. You lose pieces of yourself. Pieces you may never fully get back. So don't let dishonesty steal one more fragment of your peace. Not again. Not ever. 5. Disrespect disguised as jokes. It usually starts small, with a laugh, a casual remark, a little jab in public that makes your cheeks burn. Maybe you force a smile. Maybe you laugh along, just to keep the peace. But deep down, something tightens in your chest. You don't feel understood. You don't feel seen. You feel mocked, ridiculed. And when you finally gather the courage to speak up, what do they say? They throw their hands in the air and dismiss you. Relax. I was just joking. This is the 5th behavior. No one should ever get away with disrespect disguised as humor or as honesty. And here's the dangerous part. It may be one of the most socially accepted forms of emotional abuse we allow, especially from those closest to us. I once worked with a woman named Carol, a retired librarian in her 70s. In her own words, she said she had been raised with a thick skin in a time when you didn't talk back, and you certainly didn't make a fuss over words. Her brother, always the blunt one, would make comments about her weight, her home, her divorce, always with a smirk, always followed by, "You know, I'm just being honest." Or if you can't take a joke, "That's on you." For decades, Carol shrugged it off. She let it slide. Until one day, at a holiday dinner, her brother crossed a line. He joked that her ex-husband hadn't left her. He had escaped. And in that moment, something inside her broke. She didn't speak to him again for 2 years. And when I asked her why, she said, it wasn't even the insult. It was the realization that I'd spent my whole life letting someone sharpen their tongue on my spirit. They call it love. They call it humor. But it isn't. That's how subtle, how corrosive this behavior can be. These aren't harmless jokes. They are precision strikes to your dignity, hidden behind the smoke screen of sarcasm. They mock your dreams. They criticize your body. They question your choices. And then they demand you laugh along just to keep the peace. And when you don't, you suddenly become the problem. You're too sensitive. You're too emotional. You just can't take a joke. But let's be clear, if the laughter only goes one way, it isn't humor. It's humiliation. And then comes the weaponized version, brutal honesty. They'll say, "I'm just being real," as they tear down your confidence piece by piece. But real honesty, the kind that is rooted in care and character, is never brutal. It is deliberate, measured, compassionate. What they're offering isn't clarity. It's control dressed up in the language of truth, from a Stoic lens. This kind of behavior is the exact opposite of virtue. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that words should be used as a physician uses medicine to heal, never to harm. The Stoics believed in truth, yes, but never at the expense of kindness. Never at the expense of wisdom. Disguising cruelty as truth is not courage. It is cowardice with a clever vocabulary. So how do you respond? First, you stop laughing at what hurts. You stop explaining away what wounds you. When someone crosses a line and tries to wrap it in humor, you name it. You say calmly, "That felt disrespectful," not aggressively, not defensively, just clearly. And then you let the discomfort sit where it belongs with them. If the behavior continues, you escalate your boundary, not with yelling, not with rage, but with action. You step away. You withdraw emotionally, and if necessary, you remove them from your space entirely. Because repeated disrespect, even when disguised as a joke, is no less real. Simply because it comes with a smile. The people who deserve your time are the ones who care how their words land, not just what they meant. And if the person wounding you happens to be someone close, family, friend, partner, remember this. Proximity does not equal entitlement. No one, no matter how close, has the right to degrade you. You are allowed to say, "That's not funny." You are allowed to say, "That's not love." And you are absolutely allowed to say nothing at all while walking away from people who mistake cruelty for connection. Because your dignity is not up for debate. Not in your presence. Not anymore. You've just seen 5 behaviors no one, not even family, should ever get away with. Constant criticism, boundary violations, gaslighting, chronic dishonesty, and disrespect disguised as humor. These are not quirks. They are warning signs. And now that you recognize them, the real question is, what will you do next? Because tolerating toxic behavior doesn't make you strong. It makes you tired. Every time you let someone cross a line without consequence, you teach them and you teach yourself that your peace is optional. But it isn't. So pause. Ask yourself, does this relationship energize me, or does it empty me? If it subtracts more than it adds, that isn't love. That's damage disguised as loyalty. Start small. Set one firm boundary. Say no without guilt. Call out one joke that isn't funny. These small acts of self-respect, they are how you begin to rebuild a life that feels safe, strong, and fully yours. If this message spoke to you, drop a comment below. Share your voice. It might be exactly what someone else needs to hear tonight. And if you're ready to keep growing, subscribe and stay close, because your journey isn't over. The next video on your screen is your next step toward peace. Click it now. You've already proven you're brave enough to face the truth. Now let's keep going.